And here we go. Well, good evening, friends. Welcome to School Parent Education Series. At the Norris School, we like to take a brief moment of mindfulness just to put the day behind us, take a few big breaths, and come together as a community. So if we could just take a few minutes of quiet with ourselves. So welcome again to our evening. I'm grateful to Marcia Miller, our Director of Admissions, for organizing this important and useful series at the Norris School. So thank you, Marcia, for bringing us together tonight. My name is Mara Castro, and I am proud to be the head of Norris School. We are a progressive college preparatory high school that is intentionally small by design. Our students are accepted into great colleges and universities, and they learn wonderful critical thinking skills here. We want our students to find a path that identifies their talents, understands where their challenges lie, and honors their unique identity. With the snowfall this evening and a new semester ahead of us and a vaccine in our country, the world is looking brighter today. I have been amazed how the world was revealed in new ways as we were forced to slow down in this dark pandemic. We are already seeing the effects of a kind of activist awakening in our young citizens now. And at the Norris School, we have long emphasized civic engagement and embraced the diversity of human in our curricula. And now more than ever, we hope that these actions will support the social and emotional healing of the trauma of this year. Our Parent Education Series is meant to honor and appreciate the individuality we see in our students and to give you new tools and as you journey with them down these new paths. Tonight, we welcome a friend of Nora and an expert in teenagers and children, Dr. Carey Heller. Dr. Heller is a licensed psychologist and founding partner at the Heller Psychology Group in Bethesda. He provides formal testing to diagnose ADHD, executive function issues, learning disorders, and related items. He conducts psychotherapy and ADHD executive function coaching services. Dr. Heller also runs an executive function boot camp to assist children, teens, and adults in improving their time management, organizational, and related study skills, as well as in enhancing self-regulation and minimizing anxiety. These skills help teens function more efficiently in life. And Dr. Heller is also the co-chair of CHADD's editorial advisory board, and he has our warm welcome. After our presentation, we'll take some time for questions, and I really hope you enjoy our evening together. Dr. Heller, it's off to you. I think you might be muted. I'm going to unmute you. I can't unmute you. I have to ask you to unmute, Dr. Heller.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Perfect. Yes,
all right.
we can.
I must have gotten muted when it's saying. Okay. So first of all, thanks a lot for the great introduction. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be back. I guess it's the first time I'm doing this virtually through Norris School, but I guess it gives me an opportunity to kind of practice my flexibility with executive functioning skills in navigating all the different buttons and stuff on the computer. And thanks a lot to all of you guys that are coming out today to listen. I hope that it's really helpful. We'll definitely happy to answer questions after. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a couple of slides. I'm going to kind of skim through these about just some of the background that I think is really helpful to be aware of. But really, we're going to focus tonight on very practical stuff because I think that's probably the most helpful. Certainly, I think it's probably the most interesting. So in terms of just things to think about that can impact overall academic overall functioning, things like ADHD, learning disabilities, anxiety, depression. The point is, even typical teenage things. The idea here is that you want to think about there's probably multiple factors at play when your child's having trouble with something with school, whether it's organization, time management, getting nervous, refusing to have their camera on if they're on Zoom. There's not always one explanation for why they have trouble. So it's always important to look at the different possibilities when you're figuring out how to target the right intervention to help them. What is executive functioning? Obviously, we're going to be talking about it a lot today, so it's probably a good idea to have at least some understanding of what it is. For those of you that have had testing done and have, remember anything about the report, this breakdown here of different aspects of executive functioning may look familiar. That's because it's actually from the Brief 2, which is a rating form that you may have completed that looks at executive functioning skills. So you can think about it as a couple categories. So behavior regulation is the idea of inhibition. So stopping yourself from acting on impulses. So if your child thinks, oh, well, I don't really want to sit during class. I want to get up and go use the bathroom because I feel like it. Or I want to get on my phone and do something. The ability to realize, oh, I shouldn't be doing that and stop themselves. The trouble with that is where it is an issue of behavior regulation. In terms of emotion regulation, things like shifting attention. So being able to go from one task to the next. This also can carry over in terms of talking too. But even like if you get stuck on an exam with going from one question to the next, or if you can't go from one assignment to the next without getting up and getting really distracted. Cognitive regulation is probably what you think about more stereotypically with executive functioning. So trouble with getting started on tasks, follow through, organizing both information as well as planning and things like that. Okay, how do executive functioning issues impact school functioning? So I'm guessing a lot of you, as you're watching this tonight, probably have a pretty good idea. Otherwise, you most likely might not even be here. But in any event, it's important to highlight a few of the more common things. So in terms of trouble getting started on work, planning ahead, leaving assignments for the last minute, things like that, can definitely, pose a problem. Or another big one that is often an issue is trouble following multi-step directions. What's really interesting is that a lot of people have this perception that if stuff's online, so if your school has an online portal, that kids that have executive function issues, they're gonna, be able to function much better because it's online. That's not always the case. A lot of kids actually have more trouble if they have executive function issues, actually sometimes have more trouble with some of the school portals. I mean, granted, I don't know how you guys feel, if you have access to your kids' online portal, but some of them are actually really hard to navigate. There's like a lot of different places to go for classes. Sometimes kids don't even realize all the best ways to actually get to it. Like, for example, I don't know, pick Minus Classroom as an example, that there's several different ways to view all the assignments. And a lot of kids don't realize there's different ways you can actually pull them all into one place. So you're not constantly clicking 10 buttons going class by class and then trying to remember which class did I look at, which one did I not. So the point here is that there's a lot that just because something's online or electronic doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be easier if someone has executive function issues. Okay, how do other mental health issues impact academic functioning? I'm not going to go into much detail on this. I'm just putting this here just because it's important to remember that there are things other than executive functioning itself that can impact overall functioning. But at the same time, executive function issues can be caused by multiple things. They can be with ADHD. They can be related to anxiety or depression. There's lots of things. So when we talk about executive functioning, it doesn't necessarily mean it's one disorder or another. I mean, it's really like a representation of, the functional deficit in a sense of, time management, organization, and things along those lines. Okay, so now we're starting to really get closer to the very practical stuff for the rest of today. So the key thing when you want to think about how do you help a child or teen with executive functioning issues is that it's not one thing, it's not one size fits all, and it's not one approach. I mean, there's no pill that's going to magically fix everything with executive functioning. For people that have ADHD, medicine is often a big component of it, which helps with the focus and sometimes with task initiation, but it's not going to magically give you these organizational skills. It may make it easier to use strategies that you have, but you have to sort of have those skills in the first place. And so you want to think about, psychotherapy, medication, tutoring, lifestyle changes, getting enough sleep. I mean, I really just can't emphasize enough the importance of sleep. I mean, when I do evaluations for kids, I mean, sometimes if kids have really poor sleep habits, like they'll actually perform very similar to people with ADHD, even if they don't have ADHD, just because they're really unfocused because they're so tired. Or, usually if I have someone fall asleep in my office while we're doing testing, that's often, not always, but often a sign that there's some issues with sleep. In some cases, getting formal supports from the school can be really helpful, whether it's a 504 plan, an IEP, whatever it's called, if it's a private school. And number 3 is probably among the most important ones, and this is really what we're going to focus on tonight. So the ideas of specific tools and strategies that really, in most cases, your child or teen can use themselves. In some cases, they may need some parental assistance to help in terms of getting started on it. But really, one of my big philosophies in working with children and teens is really the idea of, or for you as parents, the idea of give them the tools that they can use to ultimately be independent. Don't just do stuff for them or keep reminding them because it's easier in the moment. In some cases, it might be easier in the moment, but in the long term, they're not going to take you with them to college, hopefully, or a job. I imagine it'd probably be very awkward for several reasons if they did that. And you probably don't want to do that either. So the idea really is that you want to use different strategies that we're going to talk about, but the ultimate goal in these is for kids and teens to be able to use these themselves. So you don't have to intervene as much, especially like when you're starting out or for younger kids, there needs to be some parental intervention, but the idea is to be systematic, structured, and pull back, as the child or teen's able to demonstrate being able to do things themselves. And then the other big piece is collaboration between different people that are working with the child or teen. Because if there's no collaboration, sometimes you may miss stuff. If let's say they're working with a therapist and there's a lot of anxiety, the school has no idea about the anxiety, and the child's being triggered by some specific thing in a class. Like if they really get anxious about being called on, and they do a lot better if, they get some notice to mentally prepare, that's probably a very simple fix you could talk to the teacher about, and then that would alleviate a lot of the anxiety. Okay, so now on to the fun part. So since we're talking about executive functioning, I thought it was especially important that I try to stay as organized as I can. I mean, I like to be organized in general, but so with this, these are kind of the main things I'm going to focus on tonight. So we're going to talk about organization, workspace, time management, reducing distractions, harnessing fidgeting. That's a personal favorite of mine. I'll show you some cool gadgets in a few minutes on that. Improving focus, study tools, and some general stuff for improving academic skills. Okay, so in terms of organization, I mean, first of all, these are general strategies. One size does not fit all. In the same way, like I would never tell someone you have to use a planner in this way, you have to use a calendar in this way. Everyone's different. Like you want to think about what is the end goal. So the end goal is keeping track of assignments, getting stuff done. But there's lots of different ways of getting there. And that's where kind of getting your child or teen's buy-in is really crucial. So trying to buy a paper planner and say you have to use this, that's probably not going to go over very well. But if you give them a couple options, let them explore stuff for themselves and try out things, even if in some cases maybe you see from the start, it's not going to work. Every child's different, but in a lot of situations, if you actually let them try something in a systematic way, or at least you can kind of measure if it's working, and they sort of fail miserably at it, in a lot of cases they're going to recognize, this clearly did not work well, but let me actually try a different way now that I've gotten a chance to actually prove that it doesn't work. I mean, like one example I can think of is, or actually I've seen it several times, where let's say I'm working with someone and, they want to use, let's say, an accordion folder system. For some kids that works well, for some kids it really does not work well. And, even if I think maybe this may not work that well, I want to give them the opportunity to try it out for themselves. And, one person says that to me in particular, where we tried it out and the child himself realized after about a week that this really was not working, and then on his own switched to a different system that worked much better. But I think had I just said from the start, that's a horrible system that's not going to work, one, I never know for sure, but also if I was sort of adamant that's not going to work and didn't value his opinion, he probably would have been far less likely to try anything as, with his full effort. Okay, so in terms of the idea, though, of organizing tasks, so for assignments, a general rule of thumb is that you should have, or your child or teen should have one place where all assignments are listed in one place. So for some kids, this might be the school portal, or in a lot of cases, it may be helpful to have the assignments listed separately from the school portal, whether it's in like a homework app of some kind or in a paper planner. But the idea is you can't expect, a lot of kids try to rely too much on their memory. And whether you have a good memory or not, this is one of those situations where you really should not trust your memory. Basically, by having all assignments written down, it makes it a lot easier for planning, and you're less likely to forget things. And like, think about it this way. As adults, I assume a lot of you probably use a calendar of some kind. If you said, I'm going to put half my appointments for the week in a calendar and I'll just remember the other half, maybe it works in a lot of cases, but there's probably more times you're going to screw up forgetting things by not having everything written down to visualize it. So like, what I think could be really helpful is if assignments are already in something electronically, like Microsoft Classroom, which is, I guess, Canvas, or Schoology, or whatever portal your school uses, there's actually a lot of ways where you can automatically pull the assignments from there and have them sync to an external calendar. So for example, with Canvas, if you go on the bottom right of the page, there's a button that says calendar feed, and you can basically click that button, you copy the link, and you can paste it into any sort of external calendar. So you can put it into Google Calendar. With the My Homework app, which is essentially an electronic homework planner, it lets you, it syncs it, so you use the link, and then all the assignments get pulled automatically into it. So for some kids, some kids really do well with writing all the assignments themselves. There's a benefit to them in writing it out, even if they could automatically have it sync, or obviously for writing paper, you don't really have the sync option. But other kids do better that if it's less work for them. So if it's all they have to do is see it and click a few buttons to organize how they're going to plan it out, that works better. So the bottom line is they should have a place where all assignments are written in one place to start. That's sort of your idea of we'll call it sort of a master plan. Then the next thing is, in addition to that, because most assignments, especially as your children get older, are not going to be done, or with block scheduling, are not going to be due the next day, you probably it's helpful for kids to have a plan on what are they going to do on today. Because if they have an assignment due in a week, maybe they'll work on part of it, or maybe they have a lot of other little things, and so they're not going to do it today. But if you keep doing it based only on the due date, it may turn out you keep pushing something off, and then all of a sudden, oh no, I have this huge thing due tomorrow, I haven't started it. And so that can be a big problem. So you want to kind of avoid that. In some cases with the idea of a daily plan, especially if you're attending school online or there are a lot of breaks, sometimes planning out the whole day, including Zoom calls and breaks, can be really helpful. So for example, right here, I have an example of a plan that's sort of a mixture of different schools and things. But basically the idea is, as you can see here, so this person has from 10 to 11 an English Zoom call. And then afterwards they have a 15-minute break where they're doing push-ups and sit-ups. So I want to draw your attention to how the breaks are listed. So not only are breaks in here, but the activities to do during breaks are actually put in as well. For a lot of people, in this case, this is probably like a scheduled break. And so because of that, it's not like they're saying, I'm going to take 10 minutes and then go back to work. But in this case, whether it's time limited or you create the time limit, the idea is think about what you're going to do during a break. So for a lot of people, if you're sitting a lot, it's good to get up, do something active. And in some cases even, we'll talk about breaks in more depth later, but you're thinking about that if you do something that's time limited, it's going to be easier to get back on track to whatever you're doing after. And the idea here, as you can see, is it's broken down. It's fairly straightforward. You have the classes, you have the breaks, and then if you look at the afternoon part, it shows the homework that the child is going to do. So they have, let's say, a math worksheet, science. One of the other things that you may notice is that there's an estimated completion time in it. So a lot of times, if you ask your child, what do they have for homework? First of all, like a suggestion with that would be, if you're going to ask them, sit down and actually have them look at something online with you or their planner. Because first of all, you're kind of encouraging them to rely on their memory. If you just ask them, they walk through the door, or whether they're coming in the house or another room if they're doing school online. But then the problem is if they remember inaccurately, or they may say, oh, I have these things to do. But if they have no concept of how long it actually takes to complete them, you can make a plan, but it may not work very well. The other problem is that especially if you have kids that are resistant to making plans, it's helpful to look at why are they resistant. So obviously everyone is different, but there are definitely a lot of kids that have tried to make plans in the past and feel like their estimations are so off that it's pointless to them because they feel like that they can never stick to it. And we'll talk, and with planning, you want to think about it too. It's not just about having a plan, but you also need to have some flexibility, because no matter how well you plan stuff, things are going to come up. Whether it's, a very common thing like a time estimation issue, whether, I don't know, the internet goes out and you miss part of the directions for the assignments, so you have to do a later date when you hear back from the teacher. There's lots of things that could go wrong. So it's always important to have that flexibility to adjust things in a plan as needed. In terms of physical organization, so I mean, with the increase for a lot of schools in using technology, there may be less papers in some cases. If stuff's online, if you're not printing off as much, there may be less papers. But in general, there's still a benefit of having some sort of organized system for papers. So, having a binder where, sections for each class, folders. Like the key, though, is to whatever is going to help your child team to get the papers put in the right place as easy as possible. So, for example, with a binder in theory may work really well. But let's say if your child's attending class in school and the teacher's not hole punch stuff, then what do you do? So that's a situation where you either maybe have a separate folder that they file stuff in and then hole punch it at home, or you figure out just using folders. But the idea is if it's not feasible to actually put stuff into a binder in the moment, unless you have a plan to do it at a different time, it's probably not going to go very well, or at least it's unlikely to, and the papers may just get sort of mangled in the backpack or somewhere else. And again, everyone is different. So you want to think about, what is your child willing to do? I mean, folders have their benefits, but also they have drawbacks. I mean, sometimes kids cram a lot of papers into folders and then it's hard to find them. And if they're not put chronologically, it can be really hard. One thing that's really helpful if your child is going to school in person is with a backpack, if you have them keep like a manila file folder in the front, and anything that have a rule, no papers get loose in the backpack. Anything that otherwise would go loose into the backpack, put in the middle file folder. I mean, it's funny because I keep I use these a lot. So I have in my office, normally with kids, I just sort of hand them out pretty much, because if you think about it, like to actually put stuff into your backpack, you don't even have to take the folder out of the backpack to put it in. Literally, you can open it up and just stick it in with the backpack mostly closed. And so it's really simple. So there's really no reason why paper shouldn't go, in there, or, if someone's willing to do that. I mean, obviously you have to have your child or team's buy-in for this. You can't sort of force stuff on them because that's probably not going to go very well either. But the idea really is have some sort of physical organization, keep it as simple as possible, and really listen to your child or teen on what they're willing to do. And give them ideas, but don't force them to do stuff in a certain way unless, the school has a requirement of that for some reason. Okay, so workspace. Obviously, sort of, prior to the pandemic, the workspace was usually meant for just homework. Now, for some people, the workspace is now also where you have classes. So it obviously adds to sort of, one, the need to have a good workspace, but also the flexibility in its uses. I mean, in general, and a lot of this stuff is actually probably relevant for you guys as adults, depending on your type of job as well. But first of all, you want to have things as free from distraction as much as possible. One of the other big things, which I know can sometimes be a little bit harder when you're doing school at home, but if you can, have a set workspace that they use only for, or your child or teen only uses for school stuff. Don't have them be doing homework in the middle of the living room right in front of where they play video games. If you don't have a separate room for that, that's perfectly fine. That's understandable. Obviously everyone's space is different. The idea really is you could, even if you had to, you could use, even if you the same general area, but maybe you switch your child or teen use a different chair when we're doing school, or they, turn the computer monitor a different position. So there's ways even in the same exact space to make it different for school. Same thing even with a cell phone. So while it's probably better, we'll talk about distractions a little bit more depth later, it's better obviously not for your child or teen to have their cell phone out during class unless they absolutely need it. But if for some reason they do truly need their cell phone during class, you could help them to differentiate the use of it by putting it in a dock. So something like this. Because what they can do is they can put it in here, and use a keyboard with it, and then this way even if they still have access to the phone, but what it's doing is it's showing them that, hey, I'm in school, this is something different, so I'm going to use the phone differently and not use it for going to Instagram or Snapchat. The other big thing is, some people really think about trying to cram as much as you can onto the desk of school supplies. While it might make them accessible, it also makes it far more likely to get disorganized easily. The idea really should be that other than a computer and whatever you're using in the moment, or maybe a pencil or something like that, everything, the less you can have on the desk, the better. The caveat to that, though, is by having as much as you can within arm's reach. So, for example, I grabbed this pretty easily just because I had it right here. But for stuff I use regularly, being able to, even if it's not on my desk, being able to grab it, is really important, because then it makes it a lot more efficient. Because if your child or teen has to get up, whether it's for an assignment or during class to get supplies, one, that's going to take time. It's also going to may lead to getting distracted. And like, let's say they're attending school at home and I don't know, go looking for paper. They walk into another room, something else is going on, then they just start talking, get distracted. Or like you start talking to them forgetting they're in class, and then 5 minutes has gone by and they've missed a lot. So for a variety of reasons, having everything as as organized and but close to where you can reach it as possible is really important. The other thing to think about is if you're doing school online, think about the workspace as far as how the computer is set up. So for some kids, if they're using, let's say, a regular laptop and they have the Zoom class on it and have to do all of their assignments at the same time, for some kids, having to shift from one tab to next can lead to getting distracted more easily. Or like for some kids, they really do better when they have the video up the whole time, but also can see a screen to be able to, let's say, pull up a Google Doc or do whatever they're supposed to do during class. So what can be helpful for this in some cases is to have multiple screens. So either have maybe the laptop in front and then have an external monitor, so you could have basically the video on the main laptop and then have the workspace behind it. Depending on the height of the computer, you might need a little shelf or something to put the extra computer on. Another option theoretically would be to use a tablet in front, again, with a dock like this, and then you could have the laptop behind it. As long as the laptop is high enough, you could pretty much have a view of the whole thing. Everyone's different. Some people like to have a much bigger screen for working. Some do better and stay better focused with a smaller screen. So the idea is to really talk to your child team. In some cases, you have to use trial and error. To try it out, see try it one day, a certain way, see what works, and if it doesn't work, try a different way. But also, I think getting your child or team's buy-in into testing these things out can often go a long way. Because if you just all of a sudden say one day, by the way, you're using this computer, I'm taking away your other one, you're probably going to get pushback. But if you sort of talk to them about and get them to see for themselves the benefit of it, they're more likely to be interested in trying these things out. Okay, so in terms of time management, I know, so we've talked about planning a little bit already as far as making a plan goes. The other big piece of this, and this is kind of where the idea of independence really comes in, is instead of reminding your child or teen, do your homework, make sure you log in for your class. Think about all the different ways of modern technology, especially ones that are probably built into a lot of the devices that your child or teen already uses or has to use for school, of ways that they could be reminded automatically to do a lot of these things. So for example, if you have a personal assistant, like a Google Home or Alexa, you could easily set it up and say, I would talk with your child team and have them try to set it up themselves if they're willing to, but have a reminder, 1 o'clock when school starts up again. A few minutes before, have a reminder, log back into school. And as long as they're within earshot of it, that'll work. Or as great as it would be for your child or teen to be off their phone or other electronic devices during the lunch break, if you know that they're going to be on their devices, or at least at some point, you could still they could have a Google Calendar alert pop up, or Reminders app alert, or different calendar app alert pop up saying, time to get back to school. If the links to Zoom classes are not very well organized in a school portal, you could actually put the link in the calendar reminder, and then when it pops up, all you do is click it and open it up. Honestly, that's what I do when I have a lot of meetings. Is if I don't get an automated calendar invitation, I'll copy and paste the link sometimes and then put it in. So when I'm if I'm rushing to open up a meeting, all I have to do is I see the alert saying time to start the meeting. I click the button and the link, so I don't have to go fishing through my email to find a link last minute. So the idea is these are things that obviously kids and teens can use, but adults can use them as well. And so again, that's also one of the beauties of this idea, is that you're really allowing yourself to be able to give your child or teen tools that they can use themselves into adulthood. Who knows what the technology will be like in 10 years, but presumably it'll be maybe the same type of stuff, possibly better. But it's, oftentimes the concepts don't change as much over time. It's just maybe the layout of it or features you can do. And you could set these things for reminders for, getting started on homework. If you set up a homework plan with your child or teen for them to start at a certain time, you could use Alexa or reminders on their phone. There's a good chance if they have pretty free range of their phone, they're probably going to be on their phone before it's time to start homework. One of the other big things that can be helpful with this are to think about natural transitions too. So for example, if your child or teen has a hard time getting started on stuff, in addition to reminders, think about a good natural transition to do something. So for example, let's say school's over, if they get a snack and then they start their homework, once they've started their snack, once they've finished eating, it might be easier to then go to something else, such as doing homework, as opposed to having them say, you're going to get 20 minutes of video game time and then have to start homework, because Well, I mean, that in itself is an interesting thing, because if you think about it, if you have a limit of 20 minutes, one, you'd have to look at how to enforce that. I also think it's probably better to sort of have your child have some autonomy in it and not feel sort of regulated and having to disconnect. But also, what does the 20 minutes mean at the end? Does that mean that I should start wrapping up what I'm doing in 20 minutes and then get off? Is your expectation that as soon as the 20-minute mark rolls around, they've disconnected already, so they planned ahead and haven't started a new game if they have 2 minutes left? So like the idea of expectations is really important. But even with the video game example, you could give them 20 minutes of video game time theoretically, but you could also set it depending on the device for the device to turn off automatically after the 20 minutes. And then again, it's an automated thing. So for example, anyone that has Apple devices, the screen time feature, I mean, it can work well in a lot of cases for parental controls, but teens can actually use it themselves. Like a lot of teens I work with will help them to set it up themselves. So it's not the parents necessarily saying, you're going to have 20 minutes of screen time, but they can basically say, I'm going to block apps during certain times so I can get work done, or I'm going to put a limit for myself on Instagram so I'm not on Instagram for 2 hours a day. In addition to that, in case anyone's aware, on a side note, there's it's not well advertised, but a lot of the apps like Instagram, they actually have a thing if you go into the settings where you can actually have like a daily reminder for yourself after you've been on for whatever period of time you set. So even if it's not about restricting it, because some people are very against the idea of, I don't want to feel restricted, but also the awareness of the time is really crucial. So for some people, the awareness of the time is enough. So if the alert pops up saying, I've been on Instagram for 30 minutes, for some people, that's enough to say, oh, let me do something else. In terms of reducing distractions, I mean, again, we've kind of highlighted some of these things a little bit already, but there's a lot of also automated things that children, teens can do to reduce getting distracted and going to websites or computer programs they're not supposed to, or that would be distracting when they're doing homework. I mean, there's lots of like website program blocking software like Freedom, that can work well on a computer as well as a phone. There's Cold Turkey. Cold Turkey is kind of a cool one because there's a writing add-in. And so basically what happens is you can lock the computer screen on whatever, right on the writing program until certain parameters that you set each time are met. So for example, you could say, write for 20 minutes, write 100 words. Like you create the parameters at which the computer gets unlocked. I mean, my only main suggestion with it is there is like a thing where like once you like get ready to do it, it asks, are you sure, to check. I would just double check I once had someone that I think was very tired when they did it and actually put 12 hours. They spent a very long time writing a paper until they could unlock their computer. So, and again, the idea is, I think, especially for teens, like the more you can involve, for little kids, obviously it's a little different, like it's still helpful to involve them, but they're in the process, but I think you're probably going to put more sort of in place, like yourself. But I think for teens, especially, being able to, like, especially like high school age, being able to give them some autonomy and discuss this is really helpful. Because especially if you're, if you have a 16 or 17-year-old, think about the fact in a year or two, they may be on their own in college, and they're probably not going to set up all this stuff just because you want them to. So if you can get them to buy in, and some of them, there's even a lot of Google Chrome extensions, and I think that there's a slide at the end that lists a lot of them, where you can have it say, do I really want to go to this website? So it's Dayboard, for example, where it's, do I really want to go to this website? And then it also can show you a task list of the stuff you're supposed to be doing. So it also reminds you of what you should be doing instead of going to a different website. Or if you're someone that really likes trees or would be bothered by trees being cut down, there's a Chrome extension called Forest where a tree grows as you stay focused. And it says if you disconnect early, it'll cut down the tree. And so it motivates you to stay focused by seeing the tree growing and saying that it'll cut down the tree if you disconnect early and do stuff you're not supposed to do. I mean, it's a computerized tree, so it's not a real tree, but it's the concept of it that for some people, teens especially, seem to really like it. Okay, so now talking about fidgeting. This is definitely probably my personal favorite in this. So if you think about it, if someone is not optimally focused, for some kids, especially if they have ADHD, but even if they don't, sometimes they like to move around, like, shaking legs, fiddling with stuff. And so what you can do, though, is you can actually trick your mind into thinking you're more interested in something than you are by harnessing the movement, and in turn can actually focus better. However, I think sometimes, sometimes I think the fidgets kind of get a bad rap, which I think that's probably largely due to, if any of you remember the fidget spinners, which I think were massively mismarketed. I think they were marketed for anxiety because they took your mind off stuff, which was great, but it still didn't help you to focus any better. But so what you want to think about, the thing with fidgets is you want it to be something that you don't have to think about, and that can be very subtle. For example, I don't know if any of you noticed, but I just started pedaling on an elliptical under my desk at the moment. And so things like this can actually be really helpful for kids, you know, and even adults, because what happens is you can actually do it, it's sort of mindless, and especially if we're talking about doing homework or doing school on Zoom for right now, you know, it's not visible. Like, for example, I'll show you a couple different things. So we have, this is an example of a desk elliptical. That's definitely the heaviest of them. They do also make, there's a bicycle version that's definitely a little bit lighter. And like most of the things I'm showing you are pretty inexpensive. Like I think the bike's probably like $25, $30 maybe. You know, ellipticals you can find them for under 100. But, you know, they make like a Stairmaster version as well. And a lot of kids like find them, have gotten them and seem to really enjoy them. Like normally, you know, I have a lot of these in my office, so they would sort of use them during appointments. But so that's like, if you think about in terms of other feet fidget stuff, this is a feet pillow, and it can also inflate and deflate it, so you control sort of how hard it is. Some other like feet ideas include a balance board. There's also like, I mean, for example, there's also like kick bands. These are probably, you've probably more likely to have seen these. These are probably pretty common in some schools, where you basically put them on the chair and then you can kind of push, you know, push down, pull up, and it basically just allows you to kind of get some movement in. So that's stuff with the hands. So in terms of other ideas, if you're thinking about it more from like a whole body perspective, there are a couple different options. So one idea is the idea of a wobble cushion. And so what's cool about this is you could use it on your feet, or you can sit on it. And so by sitting on it, you kind of almost have to move to hold still. It's sort of like a wobble chair. I think this is actually a kid-sized one, but they do actually make them in adult-sized ones as well. So for teens, for any of you guys that have an interest in them, they're kind of cool because basically you almost have to kind of move to sit still. And so for a lot of people, you know, it works well. Other ideas include like a yoga ball chair. Like I don't know if you can see the one that the background, like something like that can work well for a lot of people. What's nice about the ball chair, as opposed to just the ball, is for some kids, you know, sitting on the ball itself, just they roll and move around way too much. But the ball chair gives you a little bit of that movement, but still holds it in, so you're not moving too far. And now, so thinking about hand fidgets, because I know these are often very common, but and these are in some ways they're very common, but they're also, I think, harder to use properly. So for example, if I'm using, I don't know, like you can also, by the way, you can buy like bags on Amazon for like $12 or something like that, of like a huge variety of them if you want to try out different ones. But so for example, like with this, like let's say if I'm looking like this, clearly I'm not paying, I may be listening, but my visual attention is impaired because I'm not seeing it. But if I basically am fiddling like that, or like this, you probably can't see it. I mean, it's good to like try out different ones and get a feel and see what works and what doesn't. So for example, like if I start juggling like this, that's probably a good sign that these are really not good ones. It might be fun and entertaining, but it's probably not great for focusing. But so the point though is you want to be able to, you know, maintain eye contact and full attention whatever you're doing. So any sort of fidget stuff should really be mindless. That's sort of the takeaway from this. Okay, so in terms of improving focus, so obviously there's the idea of harnessing fidgeting, which I think I've not only talked about, I've clearly demonstrated. So hopefully you kind of get the good visual on that one. Other ideas are using things like an interval app. So what you could do is, because people don't stay optimally focused forever, you could say, you know, I'm going to set a timer for, let's say, 25 minutes working, and then like take a 5-minute break. And so interval apps allow you to kind of keep that same pattern of however long you set it for. And then so for some people, basically by taking breaks more frequently, they actually don't get as fatigued, and so they're able to really make better use of the time that they're focused. It's kind of like if your child or teen has maybe 20 minutes till class starts and they have an assignment they haven't done yet, they're probably going to work more efficiently than if they're doing the same assignment and they have 3 hours free on a weekend. Another idea is to use a vibrating watch. These are kind of interesting. Some people really like them, some can't stand them and find them extremely annoying. So it's you know, it's definitely it's personal preference. Like I think they can be really helpful in terms of like getting your attention if you've zoned out. So you know, in that regard, they're good. Depending on what kind of watch it is, they have some other alert options. So they can be really helpful. So they're definitely worth looking at. you can use, apps to keep track of break times. Like 360 Thinking is kind of a cool one on Apple devices. Their Countdown, Time Timer and that one actually is, they have an app as well as a handheld one, and they make all sorts of different like size ones as well. Okay. So in terms of study skills, I'm just going to highlight a few. I mean, again, you guys can have access to the slides, so you can kind of look at these in more depth later. But basically, the general idea with studying is that you want to think about helping your child or teen to create tangible tasks. Because the problem is, even if you block out in a schedule study, what does that mean? And so a lot of kids and teens are just going to think, oh, let me review my notes, or I don't need to say, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. The idea is by creating very simple tasks that are almost like a homework assignment, it can help to progress towards studying more effectively. So for example, maybe one day they review all their notes, another day they, enter everything into Quizlet, or make a list of key terms and definitions. So there's a lot that you can do. The idea also, though, is to really make a plan. Like the way that I conceptualize studying is I like to think about it as 3 phases. So phase 1 is like gathering materials, getting organized. Phase 2 is where I think this probably differs from a lot of people. It's the idea of using active study tools, but using your notes. So don't rely on your memory too early, because if you try to just focus on memorization, you may remember stuff in a very narrow way, but you're not really learning it in a way to apply it. And so by doing stuff like answering practice questions, having someone quiz you, but using your notes, you're far more likely to learn it well, so that when you get to phase 3 of actually trying to do it without notes, chances are you probably don't even need to do that one as much, because you probably have already learned it. Again, just some examples of active study tools. Here's just a general example I wrote out of a study plan for each phase. So in terms of making a study guide for phase 1, reviewing online materials, using notes, having someone quiz you, in phase 3. And again, I'm going through this kind of quickly because I want to make sure we have time to focus on everything else and answer questions. In terms of some other like academic, executive function related strategies, I broke this down by reading, writing, and math. For reading, the main thing is note-taking can often be a really great way to improve attention, because it gives you an active task to do while reading. The key, though, is not to be constantly shifting back and forth between writing and note-taking, or reading and writing, because that can oftentimes get people off task. Like a really helpful thing for textbooks is preview the chapter, write out all the headings before you start reading, and then write out bullet points, like after reading each section, because that allows you to process the information, stop at a good point, and if you realize you have absolutely no idea what you just read, you can go back before you've done that for the whole chapter and then realize you have no idea what you read for the whole chapter. With math, in some cases, writing out steps, breaking it down to plain English, or creating a template can be really helpful. With writing, if organizing ideas is really difficult, sometimes putting headings in just to organize the ideas and then going back and reorganizing stuff in more depth later, or keeping some headings can be helpful. Okay, so we're now nearing the end. So this is just a list of, I think, it should be pretty much all of the different concepts I've talked about from a technological standpoint, in terms of task lists, planner apps, things like that. The one thing I realized I did not mention so the ones about staying on task is that sometimes tracking time and having a sense of how you're actually using the time can be really helpful. So for example, Toggle is a great program where you click a start and stop button. So if you type in your homework assignment, like let's say math homework, you click the start button and the stop when you're done, it creates a log for you of how long you spent on each homework assignment, which can be great because one, for some people, that actually helps them be better focused. But on the other hand, it then, at the same time, then ultimately allows you to then have a nice record to figure out where the inefficiencies. And then I think the last slide is just some recommendations for some books, websites, things like that for some other resources. So I hope this has been helpful in terms of a starting point. I mean, a lot of it is sort of to kind of taking a step back, thinking about what do you need for your child or teen, and really opening up the conversation with them. And in terms of the idea of conversations, I'm certainly happy to answer some questions if anyone has any.
So, Carey, that was just fantastic. What a goldmine of tools for our toolbox. Thank you so much for sharing all of these ideas. And if our audience wants to type questions in the chat. I'll keep track of them and help read them through for you so you can answer and not have to worry about questions. But I just love this idea of how if we can take sleep plus tools that our teens are going to gain some independence. And it's just, you know, it's a wonderful approach that you have. And it seems like they should be able to do it.
Right. So some it takes more practice and having the right set of tools and help to do it. Like it's just because you have a tool doesn't mean you're automatically going to be able to execute efficiently. So that's where I think just the practice is important and the help sometimes.
And that's why it's so helpful to know what the tools are so that we can start practicing with them. So, so I had one question earlier about where do you purchase those elliptical and pedals and things that go under your desk?
Sure, absolutely. It's a good question. Amazon. I think literally everything from there it's ordered online off Amazon.
Great. Someone's saying my teens can't get to sleep early, and so that's why they're not getting enough sleep. Do you have any suggestions about how teenagers can get into a better sleep pattern when they've transitioned to being up all night and sleeping all day?
Sure. I mean, so on the one hand, it has to be a process. That if you're going to bed at 4 in the morning, you probably can't suddenly start going to bed at 9 and have it work well from the start. Yeah, I think the idea, first of all, is to have your teen figure out when do they want to go to bed. Like, what's a reasonable time that they can feel comfortable working towards, and then working backwards and going to bed gradually earlier. I do think that the other piece of it is the awareness of time. So for example, especially if they're on their phone at night, you know, you can use, you know, if they have an Apple device, there's a bedtime feature under the health app where basically you can set it and say, you know, I want to get, let's say 8 hours of sleep. I need to get up at 7. And so it then tells you what time you need to go to bed by, but then you can have alerts pop up and turn the phone on to do not disturb mode, so it automatically gets your attention and reminds you to start getting ready for bed. Because I think the part of it is that if there's no idea of a plan of, oh, I should go to bed by this time, then the time just kind of goes by in the evening. It's the same thing for adults, and then but before you know it, it's really late. Whereas if you have a plan not only of what time do I want to go to bed by, but what time do I actually have to start getting ready for bed? Because even if you say, I want to be asleep by, let's say 10, that really doesn't work if you have no plan of how do I actually get from getting ready for bed to into bed by 10. Because otherwise, maybe 10 it rolls around and they say, oh, I'm not even ready for bed. Doesn't matter. I'll just be tired tomorrow. Let me have fun now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Do you have any suggestions for where to start with a child who is not motivated to get organization skills or sleep better?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hard if they're not motivated. Like I would, like if you could find ways, like even if it's not school stuff, that whether it's like finding stuff in the room more easily, or even like organization, like with like sometimes with certain games, like computer games and stuff. If there's some like, or I don't know, like if someone's running Dungeons and Dragons as an example, like, you know, if you organize with, you know, how do they, you know, give the information out to people? When do they start writing the script? You know, like if you like figure out what your child or teen's hobbies and interests are, and figure out, you know, how can you weave these types of things? Because executive functioning skills really are about things in life. It's not just school. So if you can kind of hone it in based on whatever your child is interested in, then that can often be a good starting point. Yeah, like even like, you know, for example, I can just think of kids I work with where, you know, they're really into theater or like writing like plays or something. And so basically, you know, then the planning becomes around, you know, how do they build in time to do these things they want to do with their schoolwork?
There's a question, how do we implement strategies of removing cell phones, video games, TV distractions when doing schoolwork? Because they get a lot of pushback when they would try and remove those distractions.
I mean, first of all, I would probably not suddenly walk in and grab all this stuff and say, we're taking this in the middle of them doing homework. Like, I think I would try to have a calm sit-down conversation, not, you know, at a time, you know, maybe on a weekend when things are calmer, there's not a lot going on. And, you know, maybe start by opening up a discussion and looking at, you know, how, like your perception of things, get your team's perception on like what's on like where the issues are. Because also if the work's getting done, it's getting turned on time, the quality's fine, your team may not feel like there's any issues. And then so then the question becomes, what is the issue? Is it just that you don't want them on the devices that much? Because I think if you can start by figuring out what is the actual identifiable issue, that's a good starting point to work backwards from. I mean, in a lot of cases, like if you implement a lot of like very strict structure from the start, there's often going to be like an increase in pushback initially. So one, that's sort of normal, but that, yeah, I think if you can kind of try to, you know, talk to your kids about it and like work collaboratively on it, some sort of agreement. So for example, if maybe you really want to limit the screen time to say, what do you think is reasonable, get some sort of parameters and maybe like meet them halfway. Or so what's hard sometimes is in some cases if you're so focused on the limits, sometimes kids push back more against it. Whereas like another approach in some cases is to be able to kind of weave in the screen time naturally. So it may be a little bit hard with the pandemic, but normally if like you can, I'm going to say, like basically if you can like let's say your child has, I don't know, sports practice after school and then they come home and do homework, that doesn't really leave that much time for screen time anyway. So if you can kind of weave activities that they want to do anyway into their schedule, then screen time just becomes more of what's left over, not trying to like limit it. Because part of it too is that for a lot of kids, screen time is really like the most like thing that's like entices them the most. There's going to be pushback because they feel like there's nothing else they want to do that's as exciting.
One specific question was, what do you recommend as a tool to turn off computers and devices at a specific time or after an allotted time?
Good question. I mean, part of it depends what kind of device it is. I mean, if it's an Apple device, depending on what you're trying to turn off, I mean, the screen time feature often works well because it's built into the device. And so you can do it by, category of app. You can do it by, limits for unspecific apps during the course of the day, like how long they've been on it for. You can do like like 10 o'clock, whatever time you set, all apps except for like whatever ones you allow turn off. Computers, it depends. I mean, obviously, if it's not a Mac, you can't use screen time. But like Freedom is a good program for computers. I mean, what's hard is that you want to research them because some work better than others for different things. So, like for example, Freedom is great because you can set like blocks of time. So you could say from, I don't know, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., sort of all these websites are blocked. And then from like 9 o'clock until the morning, they are blocked again. So you can have different blocks of time. What's complicated is that, like I found, for example, with Freedom, like if you use the phone app for certain like more obscure like games, it doesn't always block them super well. So you sort of just have to look because or like Circle's another one that a lot of people use, so on the phone. Like it's good to just look at the reviews of different ones, but figure out like what are you trying to block? Like if it's very standard programs or websites, most of them probably will work pretty well. But if it's more obscure stuff, that's where you want to figure it out. Plus, also for a computer, you want to look at, are you just blocking stuff on the internet versus a computer program? Because if it's just the internet websites, and like, let's say you're using Google Chrome, you can use a Chrome extension program that'll block it, but that's not going to impact anything on a computer program. And also, I mean, some kids are very sneaky, and some kids really get into, they sort of enjoy or focus more on trying to figure out ways around the software rather than actually just doing their work. So that's the other thing you want to be mindful of, is that if you have a child that becomes just focused on trying to outsmart the program, then you want to, I mean, first of all, if you can get them to have buy-in, that helps, because then they're not going to be as focused likely on trying to outsmart it because they're the ones that set it up. But I know it's really hard when you sort of see the benefit of it and they're not willing to do that.
Absolutely. One more question. My son has visual perception issues as well at times. When his locker, backpack, binder, or desk are organized, they can still appear as a mosh pit to him. Any tips or ideas?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, you want to think about, I mean, again, obviously I don't know the extent of the visual perceptual issues, but in general, like you want to think about having something organized in a way that your son is comfortable with, and that that he sees the value or the point of. Because like if it looks organized to you, but he can't find anything, or the way you've like put stuff together really just doesn't seem logical to him, it's probably not going to be as helpful. Again, I don't know, like from a visual perceptual perspective, if this would how this might be impacted, but one thing that can be helpful is if you set up something in a way that works, if you take a picture of it and use that as a visual cue, then it becomes sort of like a visual checklist. So like for example, with a younger child, if they have a desk they sit their desk, or even a locker you could do it with, basically once it's organized, take a picture of it, and then the idea is each day match it to that picture to sort of ensure that it's organized the way it should be.
Great. Well, there's lots and lots of thank yous here for you for your terrific presentation. Do we have any other last questions before we part for the evening? There, we're magically answered. So
I'm going to interrupt us for a second and say thank you for everybody to come, and I will send the slides to everybody for Carey's slides. He's given me the permission to do that. So hopefully that's really helpful. And so he's got an amazing amount of resources, I think, on from his email. So I'm going to add that also into this, but maybe they're not all included on that resource page on the slide. So, and Carey's a great person to contact for help, and even figuring out your testing, if you're trying to figure out if there's something more than just a distracted teen on your hands. But there's lots of great resources out there for you to help you support your teen. Carey, thank you so much for your help and your time tonight.
You're
Thank you so
welcome.
much,
Yeah, thanks
Carey.
a lot for having me, and thanks a lot for everyone coming. I hope it was helpful and got a lot out of it. And you guys have any questions, just please feel free to reach out.
And I hope you all
Great.
join us next month for our last parent education series. So it was a pleasure to see all of you, and I hope you had a great night. I know I did, and I got a lot out of it. So thank you so much, Carey.
Everyone,
Thank
take
you,
care,
Marcia.
everyone.
Thanks.
Night, friends.